Ho, ho, ho.
Vítajte pri novej epizóde Kvás rádia.
Tak ako každý týždeň, aj teraz máme pre vás pripravenú novú zaujímavú tému.
Tak neváhajte, nasadte si slúchadlá a prajme vám príjemné počúvanie.
Hello, I'm Mário.
Hi, I'm Mário.
And we would like to welcome you to our new podcast, which is going to be about addiction. We are going to talk about what is addiction, how is it caused, some biology and psychology behind it, and also what are the symptoms and possible treatments.
So, what's addiction then? We speak about an addicted person if he or she is physically and mentally dependent on a particular substance or activity. Substance dependence can be, for example, on alcohol, drugs, opioids, hallucinogens, tobacco, or inhalants such as glue. But the list is, of course, longer. Dependence on certain activities such as gambling, surfing on the internet and social media, sex, video games, shopping, eating, or many other things not mentioned here can be considered as addiction.
Addiction is one of the most complex and widely spread problems of a nowadays world. Not only it is ignored but also accepted by a large number of people, and many of us are able to function with it every day, and we don't consider it as a problem. However, people very often forget how serious this condition is and how serious it can get. A condition in which there is an uncontrolled use of a substance despite its harmful consequences, and people with addiction have an intense focus on using a certain substance to the point where the person's ability to function in a day-to-day life becomes impaired. People keep using the substance even when they know it is causing or that it might cause problems. When we look at the most consequential ones, such as addiction to heroin, cocaine, marijuana, or specific hallucinogens, regular consumption of these substances will come with the territory of distorted thinking and behaviors. Changes in the brain structure and function are what cause people to have intense cravings, changes in personality, abnormal movements, and other unpleasant symptoms. These changes can last long after the immediate effects of the substance wears off, or in other words, after a period of intoxication. Intoxication is the intense pleasure, euphoria, calm, increased perception and sense, and other feelings that are caused by the substance. What is worse, people using these substances eventually start to build up a tolerance to them, meaning they need larger amounts to feel the effects. But what actually causes the addiction? It is still unclear what specifically causes addiction, as risk factors vary between each individual. But scientific research shows that if a person has more risk factors for addiction, they may have a greater chance of misusing substances or developing an addiction. There are several potential risk factors for this condition, and whether it is poverty, stress, neglected childhood, or abusive parents, all of these and many others are considered to be common causes of addiction. Triggers of addiction may be, however, completely different. Addiction is considered from moderately up to highly heritable, and that means that genes can play a significant role in addiction, especially the closer the genetic relationship is. In other words, people who have first-degree relatives, meaning parents, children, or siblings, who struggle with addiction may have an increased risk of developing an addiction themselves. While there is still no definitive link between genes and drugs, scientists have made some interesting discoveries, and one of them is that they found risks for developing addiction to cannabis. Additionally, scientists managed to find over 400 locations in the human genome that may influence activities like smoking or alcohol use. This means that scientists may be getting closer to identifying certain clusters of genes and contribute to a person developing an addiction. Many people develop addiction while trying to deal with trauma or mental issues, and almost 50% of people with psychological problems are addicted to something. 1/3 of them use alcohol or other drugs. And now Mario will tell you more about the biology and chemistry behind the causes of addiction.
Yes, thank you, Adrian. But before I start, Adrian said that apart from environment, genetics plays its role in addiction as well, and I agree. Even though there is no gene that specifically codes for addiction, that now you will develop addiction to this, there are some genes which can more or less contribute to addiction. For instance, aldehyde dehydrogenase 2 or ALDH2. It breaks down acetaldehyde, which is toxic for us. It causes vertigo and nausea, into acetate, which helps with lipid synthesis. However, some people have this gene altered a bit. This results in a changed enzyme whose ability to break down acetaldehyde into acetate is radically decreased. Therefore, these people are less inclined to addiction to alcohol because they throw up after 2 bottoms are up, so they will try to avoid drinking. There are many other genes which do the similar thing as ALDH2. And now the biochemistry. The chemistry of addiction takes place mostly in the brain's limbic system, more specifically in the part called nucleus accumbens. Limbic system is a set of structures at the center of the brain that controls our emotional and behavioral responses to the information we receive, often referred to as the brain's reward system. The responses to new information are done using chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. They pass signals from one neuron to another one. We know at least 100 of them. These include acetylcholine, the first ever discovered, dopamine, glutamate, serotonin, norepinephrine, gamma-aminobutyric acid, shortly GABA, and so on. When they accomplish their task, they are usually reabsorbed into neurons they originate from. However, the most important neurotransmitters in this podcast are the ones that are crucial for our survival and success. There are excitatory neurotransmitters, which get their target cells all fired up with chemical energy, and inhibitory neurotransmitters, which keep their target cells calm and mellow. Serotonin is inhibitory and helps regulate, for instance, our mood, appetite, and sleep cycle. But as you might have already guessed, it is the excitatory neurotransmitters which are mostly associated with addiction. Endorphin is released when we exercise, are excessively stressed, or in a lot of physical pain, because it helps with coping and pain killing. Probably the best known and the most important reward chemical is, and yes, you guessed it, dopamine. It is released whenever our brain believes we should take strong note of our current behavior. Its levels rise in response to pleasurable experiences, as well as when we are in danger, in order to excite us and save ourselves. As its function suggests, creating desire basically, is very important in the development of addiction apart from the infinitely many vital functions for us. Dopamine also plays important roles in executive function, motor control, motivation, arousal, reinforcement. Its lack causes, for example, depression, Parkinson's disease, and addicts also have difficulty peeing or controlling their movement. They usually shake a lot if they do not get their dose. Another important factor in addiction is that when the brain is met with the intense stimuli that drugs can cause, it has all kinds of defenses that it uses to restore balance. So after using a certain drug over the long term, your brain will reduce the number of neurotransmitters or receptors available to it to try to moderate its effects. This leads to what's known as hypofunctioning reward system, which makes artificial and natural highs harder to come by. This is why we develop tolerance to certain drugs and why addicts often end up with new psychological issues. This Ajo has already mentioned. And now, how drugs affect our brains? They can either have similar structure as natural neurotransmitters, or they change the levels of neurotransmitters by overstimulating their release or inhibiting their reabsorption. Firstly, heroin and other opiates like codeine and morphine have very similar structure to endorphin, which makes them very addictive. They bind to the endorphin receptors or neurons, creating euphoria, because they reduce pain a lot, if not more than endorphin when there is a large amount. When we reduce doses, our brains want to have that feeling again, which is unhealthy, and that's the addiction basically. Second substance which I want to mention is nicotine, which is obtained in cigarettes, as everybody knows. First, it mimics acetylcholine, which triggers release of large amounts of dopamine. Also, thanks to it, other chemicals are released that leverage its effect. For example, glutamate, which plays an important role in memory formation. Therefore, apart from dopamine, which screams, "Do it again, it was great!" glutamate also contributes to addiction by reinforcing the habit, and we call it memory loop. Nicotine also sets off a flood of GABA, which calms neurons down. However, after about 20 minutes, GABA receptors stop to be sensitive towards it. This results in no regulation of dopamine levels. Alcohol makes neurotransmitters levels imbalanced. Ethanol binds to many receptors, including the ones for serotonin and acetylcholine, hence the pleasing sedative effects and addiction. Thanks to alcohol, nerve cells communicate slower. However, the brain does not want to be as fast as a snail, so it tries to speed up signal transmission. When you after a long time stop drinking, your synapses are uncontrollable firing without anything to calm it down. Thereby, alcoholics usually shake when they stop drinking. Cocaine and methamphetamine, shortly Pervitin, and other amphetamines like ecstasy and bath salts are also addictive drugs. First, cocaine interrupts the reabsorption of dopamine and norepinephrine, which makes impulses of energy to our neurons. And so the nerve cells are overstimulated. Eventually, an addict has to take more of it because the nervous system gets used to such high levels of dopamine and norepinephrine that it wants more pleasure and energy. On the other hand, Pervitin causes excess release of dopamine, but the brain tries to reduce it using the enzyme monoamine oxidase. That makes the magical loop, because you want more dopamine, so you increase doses of meth. However, the enzyme stops the enjoyment, and the cycle goes on and on. I mentioned bath salts, and they are amphetamine-like drugs, basically a cheap alternative to ecstasy. They contain a group of synthetic stimulants called substitute cathinones. Natural cathinones are found in Eastern Africa in a plant called cod. Its substitutes are usually methadone and methyl N-deoxypyrovalerone, or shortly MDPV. They have a similar effect to cocaine and meth, but they do it worse by combining the effects of both. Firstly, they block the reabsorption of excess dopamine, like cocaine, and secondly, they increase the production of dopamine, like Pervitin. There are many other drugs and addictive stimulants which I didn't mention here. For example, fentanyl, THC, obtained in cannabis, crack, psilocybin, LSD, and so on. And briefly, behavioral addiction. For example, gambling imposes on us an old instinct to assess reward or risk. We always want to win because it causes us pressure, and that releases dopamine, and that's why it's addictive. However, it's not only winning that enhances dopamine transmission in the limbic system, but also almost getting the reward. Our brains love to find predictions. However, it is impossible in slot machines, so it leads to gambling because they want to learn the patterns, and that leads basically to the addiction. Also, sex, internet, and food addictions are similar to drug addiction. If we have more of it, we want even more, because our synapses got desensitized to dopamine, serotonin, and other neurotransmitters.
How can you get addicted? How can someone get addicted, and how can you tell that someone has a problem? There are numerous psychological signs of addiction, and one of the first and most significant one is an inability to stop using. In most cases, addicted people are not able to give up their regular dose, and they will do whatever it takes in order to get their dose. The individual usually continues regularly taking the substance even though they have developed related illnesses. For instance, a smoker may continue smoking even after the development of a lung or heart disease. What is important to mention, however, is that these people are often unaware of these consequences, and therefore it is very important to let them know that they are actually hurting themselves. Dropping hobbies and activities is also another sign that someone might have a problem. And as an addiction progresses, the individual may stop participating in pastimes they enjoy. And people who are dependent on tobacco, for example, might find it difficult to physically cope with taking part in their favorite sport or going to work regularly. Another example might be caffeine. As it is also very common and highly addictive, many people wouldn't be able to function on a daily basis without it. Even a basic task such as cooking or walking a dog can seem very hard without caffeine. Another very easily spotted sign can be a change in appearance. A person may begin to appear more disorganized, messy, tired, and drained, as using the substance or carrying out the addictive behavior replaces the key parts of the day of the given person, meaning that he or she won't have time for washing clothes or attending personal hygiene. And of course there are many other signs of addiction. A person may have problems sleeping, change appetite, be in denial, or get into problems with legal authorities. However, these are the most common ones. When we are addicted, there are several types of treatment. Addiction treatment may differ according to your needs. You can choose the treatment that works best for you based on the substance you are abusing, the level of care you need, and also your personal mental health. The best known one is for sure detoxification, which is one of the most effective and best known types of treatment. It is medically assisted detox that allows you to clean your body of addictive substances in a safe environment, which is the most important part of it. This is beneficial because sometimes substance withdrawal can cause unpleasant or even life-threatening physical symptoms. However, because detox does not treat the underlying behavioral causes of the addiction, it is typically used in combination with other therapies. Another well-known therapy might be cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a valuable treatment tool because it can be used for many different types of addiction, including some of the less frequent ones, for instance food addiction or prescription drug addiction, but also the very common ones such as alcohol addiction. Not only it can help you recognize the unhealthy behavioral patterns, but it can also teach you how to identify the triggers and develop coping skills against them. So not only that you can heal from one addiction, but you can also prevent another addiction, which might be also useful in the future. What's even more, it can be combined with other therapeutic techniques, and that's also one of the pros of this therapy. Furthermore, we have 12-step facilitation, which is a form of a group therapy that includes recognition that addiction has several negative consequences, which means that the first step in this therapy is to let you know that addiction can have very serious negative effects on your health. Those can be either social, emotional, spiritual, and physical. And this type of therapy begins with the acceptance of addiction, then moves on to surrender to a higher power, and eventually progresses to involvement in consistent group meetings. This particular method is commonly used to treat alcohol addictions, and it is very frequent in Slovakia. Next up, we have medication therapy, which is a type of treatment that uses drugs in order to regulate and minimize withdrawal symptoms and at the same time improve mood. However, this type of therapy is not very common, as it uses another drugs to treat drugs addiction. Right now, the world is facing a difficult situation in terms of drugs. The United States had more than 100,000 deaths from overdose during the last year, and the situation in Europe is also getting only worse and worse. Almost 70% of the population between the ages of 15 and 35 is using drugs, and the numbers are still rising. Only in Europe, the number of deaths caused by overdose has increased since the last century from 4,000 to more than 8,000 a year. The numbers since the outburst of COVID-19 pandemic have only increased as well. However, as we mentioned before, addictions are not only connected with drugs, but also with common and easily accessible substances such as coffee or alcohol.
Yes, Adrian, you are right. Alcohol, according to one study, is considered to be the most dangerous substance, comparing to heroin, cocaine, crack, or meth.
This way we would like to address all people listening to this podcast. Please be careful and reasonable when it comes to addictive substances. In case you know someone, or it is yourself, who has a problem with uncontrollable use, we attach a link for medical help and therapy in Martin. Stay healthy, and we hope you enjoy the podcast.
And don't do drugs.
Ďakujeme za vypočutie. Ak sa vám epizóda páčila,
Neváhajte nám napísať na náš Instagram @buzzradio alebo zanechať 5-hviezdičkové hodnotenie.
Dúfame, že si nás naladíte aj na budúce.
Tento podcast bol vytvorený v jedinečnej spolupráci s Učami Alumni a týmu Buzz Radio. Založené v roku 2020 Jakubom Abrahamom,